Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another LogiSYM webinar. My name is Joe Lombardo. I'm the editor of the LogiSYM magazine. And today the topic of our discussion is going to be about using technology to improve supply chains, in particular in these current unprecedented times. I'm very pleased to welcome our guest, Gary Baracco. Gary is the Senior Director of Product Marketing at E2Open, a very big company in this field. And with Gary, we shall be exploring what is going on in the industry, the tools and the new innovations they're bringing to us. Gary, welcome to our webinar. It's a pleasure to see you. I know it's late in the evening for you. Thanks you for being with us. So Gary, let's kick off by asking you to share with us very briefly your background, experience, and in particular, what have been your most important achievements in the last few years?
I have a truly unique background when it comes to supply chain technology. The first 20 years of my adult life was spent in the United States military. So I served in the Army and retired. And then I went into the supply chain technology role. And it's unique in that I was twice acquired. Not many folks have been acquired that many times, but in today's day and age, I guess that's something we should be grateful for. I started with a company named EC Vision, based out of Hong Kong. EC Vision was a software provider in the product lifecycle management, or PLM space, and our base was primarily an apparel and footwear brand. And in 2016, we were acquired by a company called Amber Road. And Amber Road is well known for its global trade and management and logistics solutions. And what happened then was we doubled the size of our footprint and the platform offerings to move further into the upstream area with the EC Vision solutions for product and supplier management. And then just last year in 2019, Amber Road was acquired by E2Open. So I've got this acquisition thing down pat, apparently. But again, the footprint expanded, and fortunately now I'm not managing the entire suite that E2Open has, because it's a massive footprint that starts very early in channel management, demand planning, and I'm only responsible for transportation and logistics suite of applications.
Right.
So my background is varied from the supplier and product side into global trade and now transportation and logistics.
Excellent. A very interesting career path you've had. Obviously, these are big companies and very successful companies. I know Amber Road and I know E2Open. So Gary, what sort of programs are you working on now? What's innovation in TMS? I presume you're referring to transport management systems as TMS. What are the innovations you're working on, and what can we expect to come out of these new ideas?
Well, since the acquisition of Amber Road, E2Open has had numerous acquisitions over the years. And the primary role that I'm working in with product marketing is working with our product management team for the convergence of these platforms. Because in transportation management, we now have Amber Road solutions. We have some traditional E2Open. E2Open also purchased a company called Intra, which is an ocean booking platform. And so we're bringing all of that ocean booking side into the system. We have a company that was acquired called Avantida. And Avantida does container management, mainly for ocean carriers and trucking companies. A company called Cloud Logistics that handles a TMS, a ready-to-made, easy-to-deploy TMS. And so all five of these systems are coming together to form a massive transportation management system and a global network of carriers and ecosystems to boot with it. So that's been my task, and it's been an incredible journey.
Well, it sounds very interesting, but how complex are these systems going to be? Obviously, you're plugging in a lot of features, a lot of applications on there. I mean, how easy or how complex is it going to actually to run these systems?
Well, truly, we've picked the best of the best from each of these platforms that are coming together. And
Right.
now we formed a TMS that makes logical sense. And because of our capabilities, we can reach further back upstream into the supply chain. I can never decide whether we're going upstream or downstream, but when we think early on about demand planning and the importance of demand planning
Right.
to what you're going to produce, we're now bringing some of that demand planning and sensing into transportation planning and transportation forecasting. So the suite in transportation and logistics starts with that forecast.
Right.
Very important in times like these, because if we are working with our carriers, ocean, rail, air, and over-the-road carriers, early on, we're establishing strong relationships with those carriers, letting them know what our demand needs are going to be, and therefore we're creating this stronger partnership. So we're going to have availability when we need it. Think about the demand in these times with COVID-19 and how important that is.
Right.
So when we're starting that early, we're then trickling down into all of the forecasting and then the rates and schedules, the booking capabilities, following up with our visibility solutions also. So it makes a logical sense. So it's not that difficult to understand and to deploy a TMS like that.
Right. So that sounds excellent. I know that planning and demand planning and forecasting is always a nightmare for everybody, no matter how good your forecasting is. What's the marginal tolerance in your systems when forecasting and demand planning isn't that accurate?
Well, there's, but it's not even just that, Joe. When they're not accurate, what happens when things turn chaotic? All right. So look at the recent times when our demand planning systems couldn't anticipate the demands that were coming from the consumer, right?
Right.
Who knew toilet paper was going to be a commodity that we needed to trigger? And actually, some of the CPG organizations, some of the world's largest, are our customers, right? So what happens when you turn that upside down and it becomes chaotic, right?
Right.
We've got times of a global crisis, and we need to have the capability to shift. And so agility and resiliency become equally important. Without having technology in place, you can't have a resilient and agile supply chain.
Yeah, we'll come back to that later on, agility and resilience, because those are very important points. But in terms of dealing with variations of data, if you are in a chaotic situation upstream, how then is your downstream data and output accurate? Where do you see, is there some smoothing effect in your tools?
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a balance between all of these, right? So the technology platform then becomes a central hub.
Sure.
We're capturing data from so many different ecosystems,
right.
harmonizing that data. So one of the strengths that E2Open has are these massive ecosystems, because we've got our supply ecosystems, we have our logistics ecosystems, right? And then our customer ecosystems all coming together, taking that data, harmonizing that data, and then using AI and other algorithms to determine, well, what is the norm, right? And how quickly can we react to that trend?
Right. Gary, our landscape is changing very rapidly. Our business landscape is really moving very quickly. We don't know where we're going. It is really a day-to-day adjustment. Clearly, we are all having to adapt. So my question is two-part. How are you and your company adapting to these very volatile changes? And what are the challenges that you are now facing because of these very uncertain times?
I think, it's a slow and steady go, right? So we built the technology platform for a global organization to be able to weather times like this. And we continue to add more functionality that will allow it to adapt. So if a company has already brought a technology tool like ours in place, then they'll be able to react and be more resilient to these dramatic changes. So it's not necessarily what we're doing to change the software. The software has always been there, but it's how it's employed and what processes these organizations are taking then to react to the demand changes that they're seeing.
So you're basically fine-tuning the features of the system rather than change the core of the functionalities.
Exactly. Well, how is it used, right?
Right.
So, for instance, we had this demand planning tool, and we said, well, if you're sensing demand from the industry and you're using algorithms to see a historical trend, why don't we do that same thing for transportation and have a transportation demand planning tool?
So are you using some form of artificial intelligence in your logic there? So what are the sort of extra features that you're adding into it?
Well, we haven't added any extra features yet, but we are building greater visibility tools right now.
Right.
Our global logistics orchestration solution is really a silo buster that we're seeing breaking across those functional silos.
Okay.
And so we look at visibility as being both fundamental and essential, but also creating transformative change within supply chains, right? So everyone needs visibility. And it's always been the mantra, right? Supply chain visibility is it's first and foremost. But we look at it as having in-transit visibility. Where are my goods when they're moving? As the most fundamental and basic. But then it leads to, when I have strong visibility based on good data feeding into the visibility tool, companies can make good decisions using that quality data. So if I see that there's a potential delay, I predict a delay in a shipment or some sort of deviation from the plan in a shipment, and it might not be a shipment, it might be earlier back in my production,
right.
Then I can react faster, right? So quality data feeds into the tool. I then can bring in some sensing to determine whether I need to, and be more proactive about my downstream activity.
Right. Excellent. I like your concept of breaking down the silos and integrating all the functions. And this is something that is many times lacking and some of the impediments to success. But coming back to the reality, are supply chain managers taking leadership in this change and transformation? Is this the right focus, or are there other approaches that we should be considering?
Well, I think that, first of all, supply chains didn't always used to be managed at the most senior level, right? It was kind of taken for granted. And now organizations realize that, what's most important is keeping everything moving, but I need that total visibility to what's happening, right? So leadership has changed their mindset also.
In what way, Gary?
When I first,
in what way has leadership changed?
When I first started in the industry, with the think back, Joe, you might have been along with me at those times, thinking about using technology for supply chains. Well, what level of technology? Can we really trust technology to do what people have done for years, right? Oh no, supply chains just move. POs are faxed, phone calls are made. It's about relationships to get products made and goods shipped. Now we're relying on automation to move those things. And once we've learned how to use that, we're not going back.
Sure.
A conversation happened today with an organization, a trade association I was meeting with. And someone mentioned that the current scenario that we're in the COVID-19 pandemic actually provides an opportunity for us, an amazing opportunity for us to change the way we behave in the future, right? So, and it's going to be a lesson learned for us as we move ahead. So think about all of the supply chain innovation that's happening in response to the current crisis.
Right.
And all of that innovation is going to now become the way of the future, right? So Amazon disrupted the industry by changing the whole consumer dynamic. That became the norm. Now we have a new norm that's going to start taking hold, and we'll see what that looks like in 12 months or so, right? How have we adapted our supply chains to react to this type of crisis? Because it's going to happen again. Right. It might not be a pandemic, it might be something else.
Right, absolutely. Okay, let's move towards COVID-19, because this is the major talking point in our life today. One thing is very clear, Gary, businesses have been caught by surprise. I mean, everyone's been caught with their pants down, and people are now scrambling for solutions. So in your view, what are companies doing to survive this crisis in the supply chain field, in the perimeter we're talking about?
I think initially there was a lot of reactive stuff happening. Let's just fill the supply chain. Right. Now, organizations, and it really varies between a manufacturer, a retailer. We have to look at everyone through a different lens. We can't say, that there's a blanket answer and solution. But the first thing we're realizing is that there's a dramatic shift in sourcing, where goods are produced. And we've always talked about that. Well, am I too reliant on one region for sourcing? Right. And this started before the pandemic, because it started with the China tariff, right? And so we were so reliant on China production that we weren't diversifying our sourcing base. And I've been talking about supplier diversification for a good 12 years and saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that was one issue that I think a lot of organizations got hung up on. The next is, are we working well with our transportation providers? It leads back to that partnership and relationship that's going to guarantee that they're going to be there when I need them to move my goods. And then last, it is looking at our e-commerce channels and our online channels. The dramatic shift, right? In-store retail has fizzled to the point that a lot of retailers are closing their doors, but their e-commerce are booming. And so is this now becoming what I mentioned as the new normal in the way of the future? Right. So I don't know that every industry has been caught with their pants down, as you'd like to say, Joe, but I think that they're going to look at their strategic plans moving ahead and ensure and give themselves a little more buffer.
Right, excellent. No, I think you're right. There is different levels of readiness in the industry. But in terms of for your customers who are using your platforms, have they found it easy to maneuver around and reposition their sourcing diversification, the transportation, and looking at how to readapt using your platforms? Has it been easy to make this transition?
Yeah, certainly. I think that, especially our CPG customers, other customers have come to us and said, we need to onboard another couple thousand users because we're shifting from this region to another region. So we've been working closely with them so that we can add those users to their platform. These factories are no longer functioning for us because they've shut down. So I need to get more licenses over to this factory. Right. So that's one example of where, as a technology partner to our customers, we certainly can help. And then, of course, showing them other areas that they might not have invested in. Well, now that you're changing your sourcing regions, who's managing the global trade side of that, right? So, and since we have the suite of applications for import and export management, how do we now, we're in and out of China, coming back into China. as China boosts production again, how do we get those streams back into China using our China trade management solution, for instance, and all types of ways that we can help the customer, and we're working with all of them as closely as we can.
So basically the benefits I see is that you've been able to help them to scale up the capacity, change the mix, and reposition in line with what's happening out there in the marketplace. Yeah.
Sure, and reduce the risk, right? So, show them the compliance standards that they're going to have to meet now as they change. If you weren't importing and exporting out of this region and now you are, what does that mean? Do you need additional licenses? What other regulations? So that brings in the global trade side. So having this diverse platform allows us to point customers to the various areas where there might be risk and help them eliminate that or reduce it.
Excellent. Excellent. Gary, let me go into a different angle now, which we touched earlier on. There's a lot of talk about methodologies. People are talking about lean, agile, robust, resilient, and all these buzzwords that we hear throwing around. But you and I know that behind these words, there's some really substantial techniques, methodologies, theories, and some hard work. How do we put all of this into the context of what you call supply chain technology? Lean is being accused to be too lean, and people have been suffering because we're too lean. Agile is maybe used in a different way, and suddenly we want to become robust and resilient. What do you make of all this, these beautiful words?
Well, I think, Joe, the idea is having all of them, but being able to express those attitudes when I need those attitudes.
Right.
Right. And let's think of them as attitudes. And I can dial up my agility when I need to, and I might then dial up my resiliency when I need to. And so having technology that's capable of going up and down in the moods that we need our supply chain to be in is ideal. And so the way we build our technology has to have that thinking and methodology into it, right? So I need to be able to flex the muscle when I need to flex the muscle, and then relax when I need to relax.
Right, because in fact, agile techniques came out of software, basically being able to adapt. Robustness, if we look at the definition of robustness, is being able to work in a tolerance without deviations or excursions. Now, these are all technical approaches. How do you build this into the thinking and the methodology that you've been describing to us now? I mean, yes, you say all are important, and I just call upon them when I want them, but subconsciously we may want to do that, but consciously it doesn't work like that. How does it work in reality?
Right. And truly, I think that it leads down to small process changes that can happen at our customer level, right? It's in the technology. So let me work up an example here. We often have tolerance and thresholds within the system.
Right.
So the system will allow you to book a shipment that only gives you a one-day margin, right? From my ex-factory date to my port of arrival date should be 7 days, but and the system won't let me book that because of another dependency, like the customer expectation requires it to be there within 6. But in a time like this, we're going to say, well, something has to give, right? So we need to be more agile, or we have to be more stringent.
Right.
So it really comes down to the processes that our customers put in place within the applications that they're using, right? So am I going to be less tolerant of deviations from what I set as the standard, right, or am I going to be a little more agile and giving?
Right. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that if you parameterize the system correctly, you can also be used as a simulating tool to adjust accordingly. That's what you say. I'm calling on the different methodologies. Did I get that right?
Right.
Okay. Great.
And we have in a lot of the areas of our supply chain applications, we have those the what if scenario capabilities, right?
Right.
So
Okay.
so good supply chain managers can go in and say, well, what if I changed this? What would that mean, right? And it goes all the way back to the design area, right? So if the price of the goods that I've designed are too high because of a tariff change, what if I swap out one of the parts and I turn that shoelace instead of a tying shoelace into elastic? Does it now change the product classification and I no longer have to pay? It becomes a sandal and not a sneaker, right?
Right. Okay.
And now it's a different classification. And what if I were to ship it out of the port of Hong Kong instead of another region, right? Does that change the cost difference?
Right. Okay.
And does it change the time difference, right? So all types of what if scenario capabilities can be exercised in our platform before the decision is made.
Excellent. Gary, one of the things that has come up in previous webinars we've had, and is one of the concerns I'm sure that you recognize, is that things like purchasing, and we've touched on that very briefly, but risk management, the people management, supply chain skills, were all identified as shortages in the industry because of skill sets, etc. How does your platform fill this gap, and how does it actually manage some of the complexities that we will be facing in the near future? You've touched on some of them, but not on things like risk management in particular, or other factors that we see shortages of.
Yeah, well, I mean, risk comes from so many different areas, and we have to think about all of them. So global trade risk is one, supplier risk is another, right? And we could look at sourcing in different regions, and even as part of this pandemic now, as China and Bangladesh open back up, the social responsibility folks are saying, well, are we doing the right thing in bringing these folks back to their factory so early? So there's risk there. And so a lot of the tools that we have that come into play are looking at these risks and sending indicators to the supply chain managers and saying, well, if you do this, this risk is there. And it's based, for the global trade side, it's based on global trade content, and we have an extensive database called Global Knowledge that has trade regulations for over 170 countries.
Right.
We have applications that are managing social responsibility, and so if Joe, you say, well, I'm going to go source from this supplier now, and you go in the system and say, oh wait, they have some ethical sourcing issues going on in that factory, I'm not going to source from there.
Right.
So all of these indicators come into play before decisions are made by folks that really would have no idea, right? If
Right.
you're in procurement, you have no idea what's happening in the ethical sourcing side, right? And
Right.
And if you're in sourcing, you don't know about the global trade side.
Right. Basically, so what you're saying is your integrated platform having trade compliance information, supply information, carriers information, gives a complete picture from which you can actually have pre-alerts, early alerts of where there could be some risks in taking a certain decision. And that's what you mean by having the complete good data plugged in there. Excellent, very, very clear analogy. Gary, sorry?
Let me give you one more example on that, because it's something that has often gone lost in the supply chain, and that's the carrier's risk. We have some customers in Europe that are doing air transport, and they said, well, can can you tell us if we're at risk carrying someone's goods? You know, when we get on an airplane as a passenger, we're screened, but you know, but how much is screened about the goods that are carried by carriers? And we have a new solution called cargo screening. And what this brings into effect is denied and restricted party screening. So the from and the to, so whoever's shipping those goods and where they're going is evaluated. The description of the goods are evaluated. The region that it's being sent to for proximity into high-risk areas.
Right.
And all of this is based off just one waybill or manifest that's presented to the air, ocean, or rail over-the-road carrier that wants to do that. And it provides that carrier with a risk indicator that says there's a little risk. Dig a little deeper before you move these goods.
Right. So we used to have the known shipper screening. That was very manual. Now you're saying it's become more integrated in the system, where we're consolidating known shipper and known user, and in between we have all this other information going through. Excellent.
Yep. And the score is called the aggregate cargo threat. So I'm aggregating all types of indicators, and I'm providing you with a threat score to that cargo. It's a whole nother webinar. Right.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. So Gary, it's been very interesting. Let me just, in concluding our discussion, let's look at what are the to-dos post-coronavirus. I mean, what can it be business as usual after such a major disruption?
Certainly not. So as I alluded before, it is, and what I've heard so much is never let a good crisis go by without changing your habits, right? And I think we're learning as individuals worldwide that our habits need to change. So many, you know, in Asia, it's always common that if you have at least a cold and you're coming to the office, you'll wear a mask. But in other countries like the United States, we'd never think of going in public wearing a mask. That certainly is going to change. So let's apply those same principles to our supply chain, right? Let's look at all of the factors that could happen and be ready for them. And let's be more resilient. Let's be more agile when we need to be more agile. And take all of the protective measures, the same things that you would do for your personal health, for your supply chain.
Right. Okay. Yeah, people get very irritated when you talk about a new normal or you talk about the things which will change. But unfortunately, that's the reality, isn't it? And it's going to be a bit painful. And I think we have to withstand the pain to actually gain the benefit of the change. Okay. Gary, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much for your time. We have discussed many topics, just touched the tip of the topics, but there's a lot more detail we can go through. Again, thank you very much. I wish you all the best in your continued challenges, and I hope that we'll have a chance to meet up when you come to Asia next.
And it's been wonderful to speak with you, and stay healthy, stay safe, and wash your hands.
Thank you, and the same to you. And don't forget to wear your mask. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.